Hi everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'm going quickly share with you my findings that pollen collection by honeybee hives in almond orchard indicate diverse diets. If you heard Liz Frost talk yesterday, you already have an idea of what I'm going to talk about. But I'll give a bit of background. As most varieties, almond varieties need cross-pollination to obtain high yields. Honeybees are often used to provide pollination, but honeybees individuals might present different foraging behaviors and also alter their behavior in response to the availability and or identity of floral resources. So we decided to ask the two following questions. First, how much almond pollen do honeybees collect in relation to almond floral abundance? And the second, what is the quantity and identity of non-almond pollen collected by individual honeybee hives? So our methods to answer those questions, we collected data from two apiaries located at two large almond orchards in Lake Powell, Victoria. Non-crop floral resources were present within the orchard boundaries as well. For pollen collection, we divided the hives in two groups to reduce the stress due to pollen being removed from the bees. And in each group, we had 40 hives, 20 from each apiary. We removed the pollen traps and counted the number of flowers on previous tagged branches in alternate days. Every day after collecting the pollen sample, we divided it in almond and non-almond pollen, measured the weight of both subsamples, and then a portion of the non-almond pollen was acetylized and the pollen grains were identified and quantified. So our first result, as expected, the almond pollen weight had a positive relationship with the almond floral abundance, and 17 of the 80 hives we sampled only collected almond pollen. It's interesting to see that bees quickly responded to the flower abundance in a short season like almond. And my final result here, we have a non-almond pollen transport network in which the squares represent the hives, the 63 hives that we found non-almond pollen in. The circles represent the pollen types. The thickness of the gray lines is the abundance of pollen grains. And plant species and hives formed 7 different modules indicated by each color, which means that these plant species and hives had a strong interaction among them. Now, a few very interesting trends we found here. First of all, we can see that some hives had a greater number of interactions with a greater number of plant species. For example, Lake Powell 35 interacted with 13 species. And the hive Lake Powell 36, which was just next to the other one, interacted with just 3 species. And overall, the amount of non-almond pollen varied from 3 to 18 of the total pollen collected by these hives. And the second point is that hives from different apiaries are connected to the same models, which means that the distance may not be a limiting factor for them. But we don't know yet if the distance from the non-almond vegetation would have an impact on this or not. And lastly, a few plant species, including weeds and natives, had a significant importance to bees, although the amount of non-almond pollen collected was low overall. Early and late season had a greater amount collected, maybe to balance protein needs, micronutrients, but we also need more research on that. And this leads me into my conclusion that bees track almond flower abundance when collecting almond pollen. Even during a bloom of a highly attractive crop like almond, the non-crop flower resources are collected by honeybee hives, albeit in small quantities. So we need to better understand why. And hives indicate diverse diets despite the locations within an orchard. So it would be cool to have a greater number of apiary sites at different distances to non-almond flower resources to test the premise that the resources collected by hives is being impacted by the distance to non-almond flower resources area or not. That's it. thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have by email or here in the chat.